Before we start, just a few words to introduce Belinda Moore from Strategic Membership Solutions, SMS, based in Australia. Belinda has assisted thousands of not-for-profit organisations for their strategic and membership challenges. She specialises in training, motivating and upskilling boards, staff and volunteers to improve performance and outcomes. She's worked with a broad range of professional associations, industry bodies and charities throughout Australia and New Zealand, and now, of course, the UK. Belinda's insights are generated from over 25 years working personally and professionally with various types of associations. She's written 4 books, The Membership Machine, Membership Fundamentals, The Membership Manager's Handbook, and Association Annie Herding Cats. An intriguing title. She's also written a number of white papers. It's actually through one of these, Association Apocalypse, that I first became aware of your work, Belinda. It was shared amongst the chief executives of the Science Council in the UK, and it was part of a lead-in on a discussion into strategy, and I found it incredibly thought-provoking. And so I used the same publication ahead of our board strategy session in January 2020, just to stimulate conversation and to get them thinking before our strategic session. So Belinda, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk to you today. Welcome. It's a great pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and it's nice to be seeing how things are going over in the UK.
Indeed. I mean, I say meet you, but of course you're currently 9,500 miles away, according to Google Maps, and about 10 hours ahead of us here in the UK. And in a sense, that demonstrates just how much more accessible we can be these days. And just on that subject, how have you found the last year, and how has lockdown affected you and the associations you've been working with?
It's been a very interesting experience, because coming into COVID, there'd been many years where associations hadn't been really adapting to the changing operating environment. And what we've seen is this period of transformation. So yes, it's been stressful. There's been so much work that's needed to be done to help our members through this crisis. But we ran a really big research project last year where we took an in-depth look at 426 associations to look at how they'd adapted to COVID. And the results were fascinating. Overwhelmingly, people believed that the medium to long-term impact of this crisis on their associations was actually positive, because it forced a period of change. It enabled them to really demonstrate clear and compelling relevance to members. And just purely with my research hat on, I loved the fact that it was a further endorsement of the theory that associations are counter-cyclical in their cycles. So in an economic upturn, associations don't actually fare as well, but in a crisis and an economic downturn, associations tend to fare better. And we're seeing that now coming out in the engagement statistics, retention statistics, and recruitment for a lot of associations. And noting as, of course, that there are some associations whose memberships have been decimated by the crisis, who are struggling to adapt. But even in those organisations, we're seeing where they've got a nimble culture and they've got a fail-fast approach. Even those associations are being able to powerfully help their members and demonstrate relevance. So, you know, purely from a scientific perspective, it's an exciting time, but I do have a lot of empathy because I know it's also a really challenging time for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenging time for everyone, I'm sure, and IFST, that's no exception. We've found, you know, the last year being a challenge from a number of perspectives, I guess, internally, in terms of how we cope and how we adapt to the new environment. But of course, we're also looking at how we adapt to the outside environment, what we need to provide for our members. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that as we get into our conversation. So your original paper, which, as I say, was Association Apocalypse, and that was the one that attracted me or led me to you. has since, you're about to publish a follow-up paper, which is Associations Evolve, which I have to say is a far more upbeat title. So what triggered you to write and publish this, and how have you found it being received?
Oh, it's the paper was only published a week or two ago, and it's been really interesting. The response has been huge, because the Association Apocalypse paper pointed out what was happening. It raised the challenges and gave some indication of the kind of pathways that people could take to fix things. But with the evolving associations, we started looking at more the models, the operating models that associations have, because one of the success factors that we're seeing as associations are moving forward is them aligning their membership model and their activities to their purpose, so they can focus on delivering an impact for their members. Because let's face it, I may have devoted more than 25 years to the study of membership, but I know it's just a tool that enables us to achieve our goals. And it's one of many tools, and it's often a time-consuming and costly one. So if we're going to use it, we've got to be using the right tool at the right time for the right purpose. Yeah. And so the Associations Evolve paper is more practical. Well, how do we align our membership model against what the impact is that we want to create?
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, for IFST in particular, it's this time has been an opportunity to really go back to our own mission. In fact, we only revised that a year or so back, and now it's really important that we align our activities with our mission. And this year again has brought that into sharp focus, I guess.
And it's been really interesting to see that alignment, and the fact that associations are really carefully considering that, because when it comes down to it, there's only 5 activities that associations undertake. They either mobilize members, going out and getting the members to do something on their behalf. They represent members, so that's the members come together, and then they'll represent them to government agencies, the general public. Then there's community models, where it's about bringing people together to facilitate connections between them. Service provider models, where the association provides products, services, events, publications, communications. And then, of course, we've got participation models that we often see in sporting associations, which is about people trying an activity, becoming good at it, and moving into elite pathways. And each of those activities has a completely different membership model that aligns to it. And in a lot of associations, I haven't taken the time to consider which activity should we be doing, what's the best model to align to it, and of course, which activity is actually going to be most effective in helping us to make the biggest impact we can on our members. And so I'm really excited to hear about the work you've been doing, because that's exactly where associations need to be moving.
Yeah, and I would say that IFST probably fits most squarely with the community side. But there is also, I think, as we evolve more on the participation side as well, so that allows us to develop our members and get them involved within the Institute. So, I mean, one of our values is food science community, so that's very much what we're about. But that community isn't just about being a community for its own sake, but in order to participate and get actively involved. So I very much, yeah, that resonated with me, particularly when I read that.
And I love that, because you know, there's always going to be someone competing with your products, your services, your publications and events. But one of the things that's almost impossible to compete against is a strong and engaged community of people, yeah, who've taken it from that transactional decision to join to this emotional decision to belong to the association. And that's, I actually think that's one of the most powerful things an association can do for its members. And that focus you're putting on there is really putting you ahead of the pack on that. Because there's a lot of associations get stuck in their service provider models, and they don't understand that community is often the foundation for it. Yeah. So that's good news. And you can't, and this is the thing, there is no one size fits all model. You've got to find something that's going to come together that you can create, that's going to be just for you and what you want to achieve.
Yes, indeed. So from your papers, can you outline some of the main drivers of change that you've identified?
So there's been a lot happening, and each of these drivers by themselves would be huge. I mean, overridingly, what we've seen from the 90s was a huge pace of technological innovation. And technology, when implemented correctly, is amazing. We can provide a consistently awesome member experience. We can streamline our internal operations. We can generate reports that actually usefully inform decision making. So the opportunities from technology are amazing. And associations who are able to harness those, say, for example, putting in place marketing automation to streamline the delivery of services, that kind of thing enables you to achieve something that hasn't been able ever in the hundreds, if not thousands of years that associations have existed since Roman times, which is membership becomes leverageable, because membership is a time-consuming, costly tool. And suddenly you've got the ability to systematize and automate a lot of that. So that's been quite big. We've seen generational shifts. So when I started out in associations in the very early 90s, it was the silent generation and the baby boomers, and Gen X was coming in. And it's shifted. We've got Gen Z as well and truly in the workforce now. Now, what's happened? And I've got to be really clear here. I'm not baby boomer bashing. I'm married to a baby boomer. I love baby boomers. But but the baby boomers built the associations that we have today. Now, imagine if you're building a house, you might want 26 bathrooms, 18 kitchens, and a single bedroom. Good for you. But then it's your house, you build it to what you want, but then you got to sell it. And that's what's happening with a lot of associations now. The baby boomers have built the products, the services, the events, the communications, the decision-making channels, the structures entirely to their own personal taste. Now, if you're a baby boomer, you walk into the average association and go, oh, this feels good. But for the younger generation, what's happening is you may be unconsciously alienating that. And a lot of associations are realizing now that these generational shifts have got to be emulated within the association. It's got to transform, not just to be welcoming to the older generations, but also to the younger generations. And an interesting byproduct we've seen is when associations do adapt, it's the older generations go, oh, this is pretty good too. And we see an embracing across the board. So this generational shift is really important because younger people have a very different attitude towards membership. For example, some people our age, we're very used to this idea that you pay a membership fee once a year and that's your membership. And if you're lucky, you might even get to pay it every month. But the younger generation have been conditioned by, Spotify and Uber and Apple and everyone else to this pay by the month model, these subscription models. And it's what they're brought up on. So you've got someone in their early 20s looking at an association, and the models that we're using appear old-fashioned and quite quaint. So the generational shift is really important. But then you overlay on top of that, we've got these rapid shifts that we've had in diversity and inclusion and cultural shifts and the way that we work. I mean, this whole idea of working from home is now coming into its own. This has had a huge impact as well for associations, the changes in our lifestyle norms and what we accept. Because suddenly we're seeing associations realizing, oh my gosh, the membership models that we're using don't encompass everybody in our profession or our sector. So you've got that. And then, just to keep it interesting, the way that we connect has changed. So the associations for hundreds of years, their primary source of, I suppose, competitive advantage has been the fact that we can connect people. We're the hub that brings people together. They've dominated that space. But suddenly, I've got a phone in my hand. I can connect directly to anybody. That competitive advantage has been taken away, and associations are struggling to try and figure out a value proposition that's going to replace that or be able to enable the association to do it better than people can do it for themselves. And at the same time as we're seeing this shift to what you were talking about before, this idea of communities and tribes and groups, this fragmentation of the market. So we used to talk in terms of these are our member segments. But a segment doesn't have a personality. And you've got to remember, community, that's great, but a community as well is huge. And within the community, there's lots and lots of different tribes. And unlike segments, you don't define a tribe, you simply identify or activate something that already exists. And tribes are very emotionally connected. And sometimes they're quite transient. They might pop up, exist for a couple of months and disappear again. But there is the power, that emotional connection, that if the association is the one facilitating that, suddenly you've got that competitive advantage back again. But that is also, while it's a huge opportunity, it's very hard to do. And it makes it even harder because of one of the other factors, which is these transformations in the way that we communicate. I mean, when I was a kid, we didn't have email, and, it was either pick up the landline, write a letter, and that was pretty well it. But nowadays, there are so many channels. I mean, during the COVID crisis, I was dealing with a lot of associations who are very heavily involved with government. The conversations weren't happening via email. They weren't happening over the phone. They were happening through WhatsApp. The number of people who had government ministers on a WhatsApp group, and they were getting hourly updates from either their advisors or the ministers themselves. The whole way we communicate, when we talk to younger people now, they think email is old-fashioned. Yes. And probably one of the biggest things that we found too is the definitions are different. I do a lot of primary research, and about 2 years ago, I was running a project, and it was to do with nurses. And I was asking these nurses, I said, what is it that you value about your membership? And, you're talking to them, and invariably someone says networking. Everyone says networking. And at that point, I said, stop. Tell me, when you say that word, what comes to mind? And the people who are over the age of sort of 40, you could hear them over the phone roll their eyes. Oh, networking, you turn up at the different events, and there's the Christmas party, and then there's the conference, networking. But when I asked that same question to people in their early 20s, I still got the same eye roll, but the answer was different. They go, oh, networking, I'm standing next to a patient. I want to talk to somebody who's got the experience and the qualifications to give me an answer I can rely on, networking. Like,
it's really interesting you should say that, because I've had a concern about this word networking for a long time. You're absolutely right. There's quite a difference between different perceptions of what networking is, whether it's going to an evening drinks reception and the purpose is to make new connections, versus the networking to share knowledge and or to find an opportunity to get a job. Or just to hear what the buzz is of what's going around. So yeah, the issue of what is networking is so different for different people.
And it comes back to, when your primary mandate is to help people to connect for purpose, the word networking doesn't really encompass it. You're right. And so trying to teach people the why you want to connect and how, because it's no longer just face to face. And whether older or younger, some people are really good at it. Some people are really bad at it. They want to do it, they don't want to do it. So adapting to be able to connect to people, enable them to engage in the ways that they want to engage is really important. And the last major trend is probably the one that impacts this in a number of different ways. We talked about technology coming in. This has created a number of opportunities that haven't been realized by associations who've been a bit slow to uptake. Some have done it, but a lot haven't been able to. And so what we've seen is this advent of for-profit and other not-for-profit and sometimes informal competitors who are coming in, who are competing not directly with an association, but just taking little bites of their different offerings that they've got. And so what we've been seeing is a death by 1,000 cuts. And that's a real danger, because, and I might be be showing my colors here, but I always think of the associations, these non-profit entities are the custodians of professions and of industries. And it's such an important role. You can't entrust that to a fragmented sector. You can't enable corporates to be able to do that, the for-profits, because associations are about the sector or the profession coming together to drive their own future. And so I love what you've been saying about the idea of communities, because that's that's part of what happens when you bring the community together.
Yes.
And together you can find purpose.
Well, I mean, going back to your original analogy of building your own house, IFST's been around since 1960, and we've developed the house, we've extended the house, but at the moment we're going through, if you like, a refurbishment, and through a fairly major project. We're looking very much at some of the things you've talked about, particularly around how we engage the younger generation. Really important that the communication channels are able to cope with and attract and offer what the younger generation needs. So I very much align to that as a concept. We also have issues around particularly the way that our members engage with us at the moment. And going back to your so one of the models in Association Apocalypse, we've moved from being a centralized organization. We've tried to be decentralized, but I think in doing so, we've ended up a little bit sort of working in silos. And the idea of working in a more distributed way is what we're trying to create now, where people within the Institute can talk with each other, interact with each other without having to come through a central hub, where we're just going to slow things down if we do that. So being able to set up structures, particularly communication structures, that allow people to be able to talk to each other, I think is going to be critical for the way forward. Yeah, it's proving a challenge, I have to say, but at the moment we have to do that. We recognize that.
I think it's wonderful, because what you're doing now already puts you ahead of so many other associations. And it is hard, but that's the challenge with opportunity. It often comes dressed in overalls. But that's great. And the idea of moving to these distributed models, I know some people can get quite concerned because it looks messy. And it is. The newer models that are coming through, if you want to enable people to connect, it can get a bit messy. But if you've got the right technology in place that's going to enable people to do this, you will still generate far more powerful outcomes than you do through these centralized hubs that have been shown, particularly in community-oriented associations. They just don't work, because the role of the association is to get out of the way. You want to twist this whole, where we provide the information out to our members, and you want to flip it up, say we're the platform on which our profession can dance.
Well, don't congratulate us too much just yet, because we're not quite there, but that's our ambition, and that's what we're working on at the moment. So hopefully if we were to talk in about 6 to 12 months from now, you'd be able to see that that is working, but that's certainly our ambition, the direction that we're heading, I guess. So in terms of the where next and building communities of practice, in your second paper, what are you seeing as the changes, and particularly, I guess, for IFST, what would you expect IFST to providing for future members?
I think the real hub for it is the digital piece, that digital transformation, because so much of what we do nowadays is about having great technology, using data and making sure that your data drives the member experience.
Yes.
Because gone are the days, like, I hate to say it, but websites are so old-fashioned, like most of the websites that you see, because the idea that you go to a static page and it's the same page for everyone and it's relevant, it doesn't work, particularly for organizations like yours, which has got a very broad church, because you cover your academic, the industry, and the public sector as well, and people at all depths in there. So what you're needing to do is to get a depth of penetration throughout the profession. And that means that the experience for each member who engages with you has got to be quite different. If I'm a student, I'm going to be having an expectation, not that you're going to help me to have a successful career, but more specifically that you're going to help me to get the best first step into my career that I could possibly have. Whereas if somebody, say, for example, at the end of their career, they don't need to know about what their future career is going to look like, but it's more looking about legacy building, succession planning, giving back. And so the needs of each member are so vastly different that there's no point, there's no way that any one association can understand every member without having fantastic technology. Yeah. And so I'd say that is absolutely number one. And I think you guys are doing that, aren't you?
Well, we're certainly very cognizant of that, and at the moment we've been doing quite a lot of work considering what each of those, if you like, the life cycle or life stages of a member are. And you're absolutely right; they're very different from a student member through to somebody who's in an early stage of their careers, through to more mature professionals and those that, as you say, want to give back. And we're mindful that you can't just provide one set of resources that will meet all of those needs. You've got to be able to adapt and provide all of those. So we're certainly mindful of that and trying to provide more across the whole of that range of the life stages of a member. Yeah.
And I think those pathways that people travel are really important to consider, because everyone's pathway is quite different. Yeah. And once again, you can use data to identify where people are. And one of the interesting things that digital can give you that we've never had before these kind of technologies is when you're looking at pathways into the association. So for example, someone doesn't just wake up one morning and go, oh my gosh, I need to join an association. There's usually some trigger event that happens. Yeah. So, and usually someone will say, oh, are you a member? Or they'll hear about an event and they'll attend an event. So what you have now with technology is the way to give people the information they need when they need it. So this links into, I suppose, the second one here, which is the way that you communicate with your members. No one wants to know everything you do. No one wants to get all of your communications. They want to be able to get what's relevant for them.
Yes.
So, and I'll give you an example. We did a huge research project looking at mapping membership pathways into how people engage with associations. And one of the things that we found is the reasons why people don't volunteer were quite shocking. We found that it was either A, they didn't know about the volunteering opportunity at all. B, they knew it existed, but they thought there was some mystery inner circle that these opportunities were available to, some like Meet the Fockers style thing. And so they didn't apply. Or what would happen is they would see it, they would want to apply, but they weren't given the clear next steps. And probably one of the biggest things that we're seeing with this kind of engagement is ad hoc volunteering is a critical segue between an uninvolved and an involved member. And this comes really much into your communities. When people first start getting involved, they don't want to sit on your board. They want to have little things. So you might get them involved in participating somewhere, a one-off event, then moving into a project, and then moving into more ongoing roles. So when you're doing a digital transformation, you can help identifying what stage is someone at for that, but also what ways do they want to get involved? Do they want to attend events, do something online, do something from home or their office? And you can start providing lots and lots of different opportunities that didn't exist before for people to get involved. And this is where you can really activate these online communities and make them really exciting places.
Yeah. It's an interesting concept that, I mean, you're talking a lot about volunteering, and in a sense, we've sort of moved away from even using the word volunteering in IFST, in the sense that what we want is for members to be highly active, and that high activity just happens to involve stuff that is supporting the Institute, and trying to move to this idea that that the relationship isn't just about true volunteering, but about a symbiotic relationship, I guess, where the individual benefits and the Institute benefits at the same time from their active engagement.
And yeah, definitely you would substitute the word engagement for volunteering in there. And you know, it's interesting because with associations, it's an interesting product. It's not like selling a tube of toothpaste where once you've sold it, the work is done. When somebody joins, that's where the hard work starts. And what you get out of your membership, the value you derive, is pretty well equivalent to what you're prepared to put in. Yes. Because the value of membership is so intangible. You can't, touch an association, you can't smell it or see it. And because of that intangible nature, a lot of people, they don't get it until they have some kind of epiphany moment. And this is one of the things that as an association, you can try and create, but you can't have it for someone. And I'll give you an example. So I talk with all different types of organizations, and an association we've got over here is Marine Rescue, where not only do you get to join, but you also get to volunteer for 20 to 60 hours a week. Wow. So it actually does do that. And when we talk about engagement, if you're one of the leaders, this group, if there's a storm and somebody's in trouble, they'll send people out. And I was speaking at their conference where I think the average age was about 67. And when I was talking about this notion of epiphany, when someone goes from that transactional, oh yeah, I suck at the sea, I'm a member, but to a deep emotional bond and a belief in what the organization does. And this chap, he put his hand up, he said, oh, look, I got to tell you what happened to me. He said, I was in my early 20s. I'd only been a member for a few months. And I got to say, I was thinking about giving it up because, the ladies. And he said, it was taking all my time. And he said, but one night there was really bad weather and we got called to a boat that was in trouble. And he said, when we got out in the water, we got hit by a freak wave. And he said, I was knocked overboard and I got a smack on the head. And I realized as I was coming to that I was trapped. And he said, in that moment, I realized I was dying. And he said, and then I got it. He said, I know why we exist. It's because when someone's in the situation that I am right now, that they know someone's there who can save them, who's coming out, who's worried about them. And he said, and at that moment, I made an oath to myself. I said, if I survive this, then I will never, ever, ever give up my membership and I will volunteer till the day I die. And he said, and my mates, they must have liked me because he said they managed to get me out. And he said, here I am still, almost 50 years later, and I'm still a member. Now, I'm not suggesting you go and drown your members here.
No, I hope they don't have to go through quite such life-threatening moments in order to get their epiphany.
But, we see it all the time. When we were doing the research into nurses, one of the ladies we spoke to was a mental health nurse. And I said to her, what made you decide to follow that pathway, that career pathway? And because she was quite heavily involved in her association. And she said, when I was a young nurse, I was sitting there, I was assigned just to watch this patient overnight. And she said, and it was about 11 o'clock at night. And I looked up and I realized he'd committed suicide in front of me using his sheets completely silently. And she said, and we got the crash cart in and we got him back. And she said, but he kept trying throughout the night. And she said, and at that point, I realized I got it. She said that physical health and mental health are both equally important in the same body. And she said, and then that's when she made the decision to get heavily involved in her association and pursue the professional pathways because she felt purpose. And associations are so wonderful for this because you have a purpose that relates to the impact that your entire profession makes. And your profession has a massive impact on our entire society. So it's a really exciting story that you've got to tell, a narrative. And that's one of the other things, just going back to this, we were talking about, what are associations doing? It's going back to the stories. It's taking things away from this big, we've saved the industry $1 billion this year. No one's ever seen $1 billion. But taking it back to the individual stories about how you've made an impact on your members and how your members have made an impact on whatever it might be that they're pursuing.
Yeah, and certainly our members have made a huge impact this year, and they've it's been an interesting year in terms of highlighting the importance of the food profession, because I think people have just relied on just turning up at their supermarket, being able to go in there and just buy food without even a single thought about the safety or the supply chain that's involved in putting food on their tables. But I think once, particularly in the early stages of the first lockdown, when food was suddenly scarce, it makes people value and realize the importance of that food supply chain. And so our community is really important in terms of delivering that. And of course, then the knock-on is that IFST, as the professional body, needs to be there to support, to provide the guidance to help our members do the job that they do, which is really important. Belinda, can I just move us on to a topic which it's a phrase which has been used a lot, particularly recently. I hear it more and more, and that is one about building communities of practice. And this is really important to IFST in terms of ensuring that we have communities that are able to talk within and support each other. Could you tell me a little bit about communities of practice from your perspective and how we can make the most of those, or make them work, I guess?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting topic, because one of the things that COVID has done is it's overcome a lot of these prejudices that we had about geography. And so now it's really pushed it that we can connect on topics and issues rather than because we just happen to be located in the same city or county.
Yeah.
So communities of practice are very, very powerful because it really helps you to move into this concept of tribalization and letting members choose to pursue their passion within the association rather than the association dictating what they do. One of the challenges with getting them up and running, though, is every community is different. It's got its own personality. And if you can imagine, because often I say to people, if your association was to transform into a person, would you want to go to the pub with them? Would they be someone you want to hang out with? Because every association, whether you like it or not, it's got a personality. In fact, either consciously or subconsciously, every single time someone engages with you, they're forming an opinion. You can't change that process, but you can impact the opinion. Now, the same thing happens with your tribes. So when you set up these tribes, you can't help the fact that they will have a personality. And probably the biggest danger that I've seen with people who are moving into these communities of practice is understanding the difference between a community and a clique. And I do tend to tell stories. I'll just share with you a story which illustrates this. So I was working with an association here in Queensland, and the people on the board are lovely, and the staff there are just lovely. And due to my enthusiasm for that association, I introduced another member. Now, and that person joined, and a couple of weeks later, they had their AGM dinner, which we all know it's a bribe to get enough people along so you've got your quorum so you can get the AGM done and dusted. Now, I tend to avoid those things, but both the friend of mine who sits on the board and the friend of mine who I'd invited to join were both there. Now, I caught up with a friend of mine who sat on the board a couple of days later, and I said, "Oh, how was it?" She said, "Oh my gosh, it was awesome. We played this hilarious joke on the executive director. I caught up with people I hadn't seen in years." And she said, "I partied till the wee hours of the morning, and I haven't done that since before we had the kids." And I started thinking, "Oh, crap, I missed the only decent one in history." But then, about a week after that, I caught up with the person who I'd introduced as a new member. And I said, "Oh, I hear I missed a great night." And they went, "No, you didn't. It was disgusting. I hate them." And I asked her what had happened. And she said, "It was all in jokes. No one spoke to me. They're all talking to each other. They sat me next to the only other new member there. He was a complete sleazebag, wouldn't take bugger off for an answer. And I left before dessert. I want nothing more to do with them." Where a lot of people fall down with these communities is understanding how to integrate and welcome new people in, to create pathways into passion, and really turning it around so that if they just had someone, and this is how the detail it is, if they just had someone at that event whose job was to bring the new person in, tell them the backstories and introduce them round, they would probably have her sitting on their board right now. And so it really is in the detail, having somebody who cares about that and who's interested. And it's really hard for people who maybe have their day jobs and are involved in these communities to remember. So you can use your technology to help prompt and engage and create connections there. So that's probably the biggest one, figuring out what your personality is, making sure it's welcoming, and providing some triggers to welcome new people in. The other thing that we've seen excites people is in these communities, there's always some really interesting conversations going on. when you talk about those conversations to people who aren't members of the community, but don't give away everything. I mean, you're showing a bit of ankle, you're not like burying them. So when you're telling people outside the community, give the teasers, give them some insights into the conversations with the linkages to come back and participate and maybe have their say. There's lots of different things you can do on that, and it's powerful.
That's great advice. I mean, the idea of us ensuring that we don't become a clique, but that we welcome people is a critical one. And that's so for the whole community, and it's a really difficult balance, isn't it? Because you want people to feel part of a community, but it's got to be an open community, one which people still feel they can welcome other people into, not then close their doors around that small group. So that's a really great bit of advice.
And you can set the tone for your communities. I know one medical related organization put in an online community, and they discovered their members are all trolls because they allowed conversations that weren't perhaps positive to flourish. And I think when you actively control, it does mean getting in and making it easy for people to report comments and deleting stuff that's inappropriate and coming down on that hard. So you're training people that this is a safe place. It's an inclusive place, and it's a place where everyone's welcome. Because the fact that you're taking these steps, it's not easy to build momentum for these communities. And sometimes when people will get in, they might get a bit disheartened because their communities are not getting the momentum as quickly as they want. Mm-hmm. But it will come if they're passionate and if they rely on engaging with other people and bringing them in and welcoming them in and being purpose orientated. Because you might have one little community on a topic, helping people to understand, why do we have that? Is it information sharing where members can post content for others to read? Or is this a community that brings people together to have robust discussions about issues? And if you can clarify that purpose and make it clear to the people who are members and who are joining, it helps part of that setting the tone aspect.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the great thing for us is I strongly believe that our members are hugely passionate and they are hugely energetic. And I know that given them the tools to create these communities, we'll have a really positive experience, I'm sure, and that they will engage in the way that we would hope they would. Sadly, Belinda, we've reached the end of our time. I can't believe how quickly that has flown by. Can I just say a massive thank you to you for enlightening us with your thoughts. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of reflection afterwards from our perspective in terms of taking advantage of a whole load of resources which I know that you're offering us and which we will make available on the IFST website as well for people to be able to read and find out more about how to make the most of their association. So again, Belinda, a massive thank you. Beyond today, if our members would like to contribute to IFST's plans, then please do get in touch with me or any of the IFST team. We'd love to hear your suggestions and your offers of support. And thank you very much again.
Thank you for having me.